Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on ISO 27001-2022 update, which covers the latest update on the ISO 27001 standard that was published in 2022. My name is Kishore Vaswani. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of ControlCase, and I really appreciate the time you've taken today to attend this webinar on ISO 27001 by ControlCase. I'm joined here with Ricardo Pardo, who is a partner in the SOC and ISO group at ControlCase. Ricardo, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kishore. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. Today's a very interesting and much talked about update. So we look forward to having questions at the end of the session and seeing what we can do to help you get your certification.
Thanks, Ricardo. A few housekeeping items before we get started. We expect the webinar to run somewhere between 20 to 30 minutes, and so we would have time for some questions, as Ricardo mentioned. Please put your questions in the questions window as we go through the webinar today, and we'll answer them in the order we receive them. For any questions that we are not able to get to, we will contact you after the webinar with the responses and/or the discussion as requested. A copy of these slides, as well as this webinar, will be available online at www.controlcase.com next week. And everybody on this call will also get a copy of these slides and a recording of this webinar for your reference. If you have any audio or visual difficulties, please type them in the chat window and our moderators will attempt to solve that problem. As I said, as we go through today, please feel free to put any questions in the questions window. You can view this webinar or any of the other past webinars under the webinar section on our website at www.controlcase.com. That being said, let's go ahead and get started. Our agenda today is a brief introduction of ControlCase. I'll talk a little bit about the ISO family of standards and ISO certifications and compliance standards that you may have heard of. After that, Ricardo will talk briefly about how has traditionally companies gotten certified to the ISO 27001 standard. After that, he will dive right into the updates to 27001. And after that, we should have some time for Q&A. For those of you who are wondering, the amount of changes in the ISO standard are not that difficult for a company that has already been certified to, if they start early, to get certified to the new standard. So I know we're going to go through this today, but right at the start, I wanted to kind of mention and comfort our customers that the changes and the path, it does require some work, but going from being certified to the old standard to the new standard is very doable with some amount of work put in to get compliant to the new standard. That being said, let me get into a ControlCase introduction. We at ControlCase focus on IT certification and related continuous compliance services. We focus really on partnering with customers and going beyond just a checklist. We have more than 1,000 customers, and we have done thousands of IT security certifications. And again, the IT security certifications and related continuous compliance services are really what we do at ControlCase. Two of the pillars that we work with our customers, not only on ISO 27001, but on all the other standards we certify companies to, PCI, DSS, HITRUST, etc. We are a partner with the customer and do not follow a checklist approach. And so we do believe in a partnership approach and ensuring that the end result is a better security posture for the customer. Through our proprietary platform, ControlCase Compliance Hub, we also automate as much as possible and streamline the process of IT security certification and related continuous compliance services. So partnership approach as well as automation are two key pillars that our customers enjoy when they work with us on IT certifications and IT continuous compliance services. From a certification point of view, we certainly certify companies to ISO 27001 standard. We are accredited with ANAB, and we also certify companies to other standards like PCI DSS and some of the other ones you see here. In fact, one of our most popular offerings is One Audit, where a customer can do a single assessment with us and certify or get compliant to multiple regulations that exist out there. And again, you're seeing some of these. There's a lot more. ControlCase certifies and helps companies get compliant to. That was a brief overview of ControlCase. Now we're going to jump into the next section, which is the overview of the ISO family of standards. We feel it's important to talk about this before we talk about the changes that are going to come into effect or have come into effect with the 2022 update. So what is ISO 27001? Number one, it's published by the International Organization for Standardization. They publish a lot of standards. The ISO 27000 series is a whole series of standards, out of which really ISO 27001 is the primary standard, and we'll be talking about some of the other standards in that arena as well. It focuses on information security, and it provides a wide coverage using a risk-based approach for organizations of any size to manage information security. Again, it's a fairly wide standard focused on information security and enables organizations in any industry and of any size to effectively have a risk-based managed approach to security. Many of you might have heard ISO 27001 and ISO 27002. It can get confusing, so I want to talk a little bit about that over here. ISO 27001 is the central framework of the ISO 27000 series. And when you get certified from a company like ControlCase, which is accredited by a body like ANAB, the certification is against the ISO 27001 standard. It talks about the implementation requirements for the information system that is looking to get certified. ISO 27002 are the actual controls. So the actual information security controls, and by that I mean things like access controls, physical security, configuration management, all of that are published in a supplementary standard called ISO 27002. Of course, they're very closely related. 27001 refers back to the 27002 control standards, but companies get certified to ISO 27001. Of course, if you're just looking to get compliant to controls, those have been published in 27002. You might have heard lately of something called ISO 27701. We're not going to talk a lot about it today, but think of when we said ISO 27001 is an information security standard, it has a few extensions because information security has extended in the ecosystem today in various directions. And so ISO 27701 really focuses as a privacy extension to the ISO 27001 and 27002 standard and provides additional guidance for the protection of privacy. Privacy is gaining mainstream coverage and almost is very congruent to security, and hence the ISO 27701 is a very valuable privacy extension to the ISO 27001. You might have also heard of ISO 27017 and ISO 27018. Again, these are some extensions. 27017 is focused on cloud services. So when we talk about cloud, we all know that the industry, a lot of our customers, a lot of your customers are all moving towards cloud, whether it's private or public cloud. And hence, the 27017 standard is a good extension to the ISO 27001 standard, which focuses on cloud services. And then finally, 27018 is really around protection of PII or personally identifiable information. for PII processors. So just like 27017 is for cloud, we talked about earlier 27701 was for privacy, and 27018 is for protection of PII, or personally identifiable information. Uh, you might have also heard the acronym ISMS, or Information Security Management System. ISMS is a framework of policies and procedures. That's basically what it is. And it really guides and is closely related to the ISO 27001 standard. And it includes all the different controls that an organization has to look at from a risk management perspective. So ISMS is very related to ISO 27001. You'll hear that terminology all the time, and it really stands for Information Security Management System. Um, you know, there are two things that companies traditionally do. One, they can be compliant, and that they can do themselves or use a consultant to help them do that, or they can be certified. To be certified, you have to be certified by an organization that is accredited. ControlCase is accredited with multiple bodies, including ANAB, RVA, NABCB, and so we are accredited from multiple bodies. And so while companies can get compliant themselves, someone like ControlCase who's accredited to various bodies all over the world, would be able to actually certify you through for the ISO 27001 standard. And then, before I turn it over to my colleague, Ricardo, who needs ISO 27001 certification? Anyone if you need to prove to your customers that you care about security, if you need to make sure your board of directors is comfortable that you're doing the right thing, and you have an independent third party validating it, if you want to make sure security, privacy, and other related things like business continuity are being looked at in a systemic manner, you need an ISO 27001 certification. The size and the turnover of the business does not dictate the need for ISO 27001. Of course, you could get other certifications too, but an ISO 27001 is the globally acceptable certification for proving that to your board of directors, to your management, to your business partners, and to your customers, that you care about security, that you care about privacy, and you care about business continuity. That being said, I'm now going to turn over, as we get into the nuts and bolts of 27001 certification, as well as all the updates, to go ahead and talk about the details on ISO 27001 in a second here. So Ricardo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kishore. So now let's talk about the nitty-gritty, right? What is 27001? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Well, let's talk a little bit about the certification methodology. So in year one, an organization that is trying to be certified goes through a full audit. The full audit covers the next 3 years certification, and I'll explain in a second. Under ControlCase's methodology, the average timeline for a customer to get their certification throughout the audit life cycle is anywhere from 3 to 6 months, starting with a pre-assessment where we do an initial evaluation of policies and procedures to go through what is called a stage 1 audit. And then when we get out of stage 1 and everything looks good there, we move into the stage 2 audit. That then triggers the recommendation for an actual deliverable of a certificate being issued. All right, how often do we need 27001? As I just mentioned, the certification is valid for 3 years. That full audit in the first year really covers the nuts and bolts, everything that is granular to your ISMS or 27001. After that, you're going to have surveillance audits in years 2 and 3. In years 2 and 3, the surveillance audits are essentially mini audits assessing the continued compliance to 27001. So remember, surveillance audits are not full system audits. They are really just validations that what was visualized, what was audited in year 1 under the full audit is still there and no changes have occurred. All right. Now, what are the common challenges to ISO 27001, 27701? That comes in many flavors, but what we have seen from talking with customers in seeing the audits as they play out is items such as agreements not being properly formalized, the vendor management process not being adequately in place, vulnerability management not being done in a proper periodic method, patching of devices not being present. So these items are just challenges that present themselves, and the better you have a tight grip on these, the easier it's going to be for you to be able to meet the compliance piece of getting through a certification. So now, what we've all been here, what we came for today, what are the updates to 27001 2022? Essentially, the summary of changes are, there are no major changes, right? It's a version change. So substantively, you don't have to worry, just as my colleague Kishore said at the beginning of this webinar. You don't need to get worried. You don't need to feel overwhelmed. The mandatory clauses remain the same, 4 to 10. The wording on the standard has changed. For example, that certain implied requirements no longer are implied, they are requirements. They always were. Then Annex A has actually decreased the security controls from 114 to 93. Also, the domains are now 4 domains instead of the previous 14. They've been grouped to make real world understanding how they're tagged just makes it easier for you to be able to understand what they are. Organizational controls, people controls, physical controls, and technical controls. So now, what do those new controls really mean to you? While none of the old controls were necessarily deleted, many controls were merged, and we kind of get out a little bit of the archaic terminology and more into a modern one. This has reduced the overall number of the controls. So now, as I mentioned, there's 4 domains: organizational controls, people controls, physical controls, and technological controls. There are 11 new controls throughout the 27002 2022. These items include such as threat intelligence, information security for the use of cloud services. Never have we talked about cloud services, but they're prevalent in our marketplace now. Other things such as web filtering and secure coding, always been there, we really just didn't touch on them like we will now. So here are a couple of examples of how the old controls look, and then you have new implementation of controls. These are just some from the organizational controls, physical controls. And if you notice, when you purchase the standard, you're going to see that, and this is actually a recommendation that everybody should do. When you go out to purchase the new version of the standard, you can purchase the standard by itself, or you can purchase for only a few more dollars the redlined version of the standard. I highly recommend that. And the reason for that is, if you're coming from doing 27001, 2013, and you're moving into the 2022 version, you really want to understand what that net difference is. What is it that you need to do differently than what you're doing today? And this will help you understand that. What is the adoption timeline? Well, as of today, the new version is giving an implementation process through 2025, meaning that if you are currently 27001, 2013 certified, you can continue being so as long as you start working on your implementation of the new controls under the 2022 standard or the 2022 version. Any new audits that occur after October 2025 have to be against the old or the new version, sorry. Now, Companies can also voluntarily choose to certify to 2022 essentially immediately, but it's more about getting things set up and ready for that, where ControlCase will be ready to start certifying organizations right around mid-2023.
Yeah, and that's a point worth reiterating, that if our customers don't want to change anything until October 2025, except just prepare for the new version, that is completely fine. So for 3 years until October 2025, you could still be certified against the current version, but after October 2025, you must be certified against the new version.
That's good.
That was very helpful, Ricardo. Thank you.
Thank you. So now, what are the next steps? So the big next steps are getting the company ready by doing an exhaustive risk register. Remember that ISMS is heavily based on appropriate and adequate risk approach, okay? So one of the first things you need to do is address your risk register to face towards the new standard. Second, you want to update your statement of applicability to align with the new updated Annex A. Step 3, you want to review and update all your documentation. So although the standard may not call for any major changes, and even if there are sections where it doesn't have changes, there still may be some numbering changes in the standard that you need to make sure your documentation adequately reflects. Then step 4, get audited against the new 2022 version using a certified auditor or an accredited audit firm such as ControlCase. All right, so that gets us to the end of the session here, and we want to open it up now for some Q&A sessions. Kishore, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ricardo. That was very useful. Just as a summary, we talked about ISO 27001. We did say starting October 2025, the new standard is mandatory to be certified against if you're going for certification. The changes, there are some changes to terminology. Some things have been simplified, merged, but at an overall level, the net of really this webinar should be that our customers who are compliant and are certified to 27001, the older standard, will have to put in a little bit of effort, but it is not a mammoth effort to get to certifying against the new version. As Ricardo mentioned, we have a time today for a couple of more questions today, and the remaining that you have put in the questions window, we'll get back to you through email, or somebody will contact you to give you the response to that. The first question, maybe Ricardo, I'll give it to you, and the question is again around timelines and around, what can the company do now, and then what should the company do ideally once they are certified?
Yep. So once they are certified, really the only changes that need to come are getting their risk register prepared, getting their SOA prepared, getting their documentation prepared. Looking at the standard side by side with your documentation, they should essentially be a one-for-one, right? So if you look at your documentation in-house, your risk register, your policies, your procedures, they should reflect the numbering sequence for the new standard. They should reflect the new wording that is required now, as opposed to implied. So it's really, again, a matter of doing the homework, reading the standard. It's a quick read, and getting your documentation in place.
Great, and then of course companies can, for everyone's benefit, the companies can already start looking at the new standard and start getting compliant to it, to get certified to the new standard if you choose to. You can continue to choose the old standard, but after October 2025, that won't be an option. Great, that was great. Ricardo, another question that I have is, when it comes to the new standard, what, if any, has changed between stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 requirements, whether it comes to timeline or the method that companies are used to when they undergo certification, if any?
That's a great question, Kishore, actually, because let's say, for example, you are currently certified to 27001 2013 in 2023. So you have your initial certification, so it's that full audit that we talked about. And then in 2024, you say, okay, I have my system set up to go against the 2022 standard. So we've made all the substantive changes. We're ready to proceed. Well, at that point, we continue with the surveillance audit methodology, but we have to take into account that now we need to confirm the changes that occurred with that 2022 standard. So there will be a little bit of additional legwork on our side. There will be additional man days required during the audit to be able to verify those changes.
Great, that's very helpful. Sounds like companies, if they choose to, even between now and October 2025, whenever their audits come up, whether it's stage 1 or stage 2 and 3, if they're ready, they can certainly choose to move forward with the new version. That's great. This is unfortunately the only time we had for a couple of questions. Any of the remaining questions, we will get back to you. Ricardo will get back to you, and the team will get back to you. Again, a copy of this recording and a copy of these slides will be distributed early next week. But you can go at any time and see a recording on this or any of the other certifications, whether it's PCI, IPERS, and so forth, on our website at www.controlcase.com. Thank you, Ricardo. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you all very much. Have a great one.